view. So which structures are being formed in the lateral view of the skull? क्या कहेंगे इसको? Norma lateralis. Okay, so it is here. So let's move here. Let me be visible myself. Yes. So here is the Norma lateralis. First, we will go to the same order. We will look at the bones which are forming, then we will look at the sutures, then we will look at the other features that are there. So which bones can you see in this particular view? Let's look at the bones that you saw previously. Here there is a frontal bone, you can see in the front. In the back you can see the parietal bone. Here you can see the temporal bone. It is one of the most irregular bones. It has a flat part, it has a tuberous part, it has zygomatic part, it has this styloid process, it has tympanic process, it has petrous bone. We will go through them one by one. And here, and the last one you will be see here, the zygomatic bone, and the one new appearance, that is the zygomatic bone, the greater wing of sphenoid, right here. You see that is the here that it forms the lateral wall of the orbit. It was forming the lateral wall of the orbit. You will be able to see right here. Okay, so let me repeat the bones. There is a frontal bone, there is parietal bone, there is temporal bone, there is sphenoid bone, and there is zygomatic bone. And if we move the zygomatic bone, you will be able to see maxillary bone also. Here, maxillary bone will be visible also. So let's see what we can see. First things first, let's see the sutures between them. Here, between the frontal bone and the parietal bone, the suture, you saw them already in the vertical mode, in the Norma Verticalis, that was coronal suture. Here, this suture, this is the present between the parietal bone and the squamous of part of the temporal bone. So that is known as squamous suture, and पैराइटोस्क्वेमस सूचर भी इसको क्या देते हैं, स्क्वेमस सूचर भी इसको क्या देते हैं. दिस सूचर इट्स लाइक बिवेल्ड, इसके लिए लफ्ज ना बिवेल्ड का लफ्ज आपको यूज होता हुआ मिलेगा. बिवेल्ड होता क्या है कि दिस सूचर इट्स नॉट, इट्स डिफरेंट फ्रॉम दीज सूचर्स. वन बोन इज cut like this and the other bone is like this, so they are oppositely sloping on one another. It's like squamous bone. The squamous part of the tympanic bone, it is overlapping the parietal bone. जिस तरह कलम बनी होती है ये इस तरह एक दूसरे के ऊपर पड़े होते हैं. These are beveled, these are squamous sutures. Then there will be suture between frontal bone and the sphenoid bone. The simple the name of the sutures will be the name of the two bones, sphenoid, fronto-sphenoid sutures. And there will be sutures between occipital, the temporal bone, the squamous part of the temporal bone, and the sphenoid bone. And the thing that you must remember right here is this point. Here the four bones are meeting along with their sutures. This is known as pterion. This is known as pterion. Pterion is the point where two bones meet. You must remember from neuroanatomy what is the importance of this pterion. The anterior division of middle meningeal artery, it is the middle meningeal artery, it is running right from here. The posterior division goes back from here. The anterior division of the middle meningeal artery, it passes from this point. This point is viable to breakage. If you get a hit here, this point breaks and it leads to the breakage of this anterior division of middle meningeal artery. Middle meningeal artery के बहुत सवाल आते हैं. Middle meningeal artery. And why this breakage and this leakage is important? When this breaks, this leads to which hematoma? Epidural hematoma. And the you must remember, you might have remembered the brain, the central sulcus. So the lateral sulcus, the central sulcus. So the point, the lateral sulcus is right here, and the central sulcus is right here. This is the Sylvian point you might have remembered from the neuroanatomy. The brain is right here. So this is the point. This is the here it is the primary motor area. This is the primary sensory area. So the importance of the breakage at this point is when this point breaks, it leads to the leakage of anterior division of middle meningeal artery. That leads to the epidural hematoma. That leads to the compression of precentral sulcus, and that leads to the paralysis. So this is the important why we focus so much on pterion, why it's important, what's the important point, and if it breaks, it's a neurosurgical emergency. You do a burr hole and remove the hematoma and plug the artery. So this is about the pterion. So we talked about the sutures, the pterion. Let's look a little on the parts of the temporal bone. It's a very irregular bone. The part that is, let me go back, the part that is flat, the part that is here, that is known as squamous part. This prominence, this is called mastoid part. This part that is making the zygomatic arch, that will be zygomatic part. This part that is making the plate that is making part of the opening of the external auditory meatus, this is the tympanic part. What else? If we look a little from the opposite aspect, let's see right here. If we go here, you will see two more things. So you will see this part. I will go into a little detail when we go to the base. So you will see this suture. This part, it's the petrous part. Let me show you here. Yes. So this part shown in the green right here, this is the petrous part of the temporal bone. It is mostly on the undersurface, and you will be able to see it when you are looking the interior of the skull. So this is the petrous part and petrous part bone, and this is the, we are left with this thing, this one, that is the styloid process. So these are the different parts of the temporal bone. So each is making different connection. Just open your atlas, just go to the, in the museum you see the bone. The squamous part is fusing with the parietal bone. The mastoid part is fusing with the this parietal bone. The mastoid part is fusing with the, making suture with the occipital bone, occipitomastoid, parietomastoid sutures, and then there are sutures present between these parts also, but they are not very visible, so I won't go into the detail. But there are squamous sutures also, better seen in the younger people. You may be able to better see the demarcation lines between this tympanic part and the mastoid part. Here you can see, and then on the inferior aspect, as we go to the norma basalis, we will be able to see the connections between the other parts also. Here the zygomatic part, a few features that are important. Here you may be able to, I want to focus on two things you must be able to remember, recognize here. So I am outlining this zygomatic part, was this zygomatic part of the temporal bone. This part, this raised part, this is the articular tubercle, and this part, it's the fossa. डेप्थ है, फोसा है, और ये है, that is tubercle. ये है fossa tubercle. Let me show you right here. So I have been talking about these parts. So this part, it's called articular tubercle, and this part, the part that is behind it, it is the fossa, better seen here. It's the fossa for the mandibular fossa, because mandible is fitted here. Here in this, you can compare the two here. Here you can see the head of the mandible, the condylite process of the mandible fitting to the mandible fossa. So this is the articular tubercle, the mandibular process. So these are the things. Two more things I would like to highlight here. Here it is demarcated here, this the dotted line. If you move up from the free margin of the zygomatic bone, the frontal process and the zygomatic process of the frontal bone, and you move to the dotted line here, you see this line. This is called superior temporal line. It moves all the way up, back, down, and it becomes continuous with the supramastoid crest. I will go into the superior supramastoid crest right now. So this demarcates the area for the temporal fossa. So this is the area for the temporal fossa. Just below it, just below this area, it's the infratemporal fossa. Sorry, infratemporal lines. Just below and parallel to the superior temporal line, here you may be able to see the inferior temporal line. This is present throughout, but it is a little vague and it may end earlier as compared to the superior temporal line before reaching the end. So this is what the temporal lines. Let me show you the temporal lines right here. And let's remove these things. So we've just talked about articular process. Here is the mandibular fossa. You can see in a more detail right here. You can see it goes into the temporal bone. Here the mandible will be fixed. So here are the temporal lines. Here are the temporal lines. Let me zoom out a little. Yes, so this one, if you follow my cursor, this is the free margin of the zygomatic bone, frontal process, and this is the zygomatic process of frontal bone. And where you get on the frontal bone, this is the superior temporal line. It will go all the way around the skull right here. So this is the inferior temporal line. This, the moving back to this zygomatic arch, I showed you the articular process and the mandibular fossa in the inferior margin of the zygomatic process. This superior margin of the zygomatic process, it continues into this prominent ridge. This ridge, it's called supramastoid crest, because it is lining the superior aspect of the mastoid bone. Here we are left with again another surface landmark. There is a supramastoid crest, and if we follow, do you remember tangent in the physics? If we are rotating something or rotating a ball on a rope, and you leave the rope, then the ball leaves the circle and goes perpendicular to the arc like this. So this line is called tangent. So the word tangent is used. This is the external occipital opening, external meatus. This tangent to the posterior wall of the external meatus. And third thing is this sub external auditory meatus itself. So this makes the मैं मुझसे जहन से वो लव स्किप हो गया. आप में से कुछ चैट में लिखते हैं, मुझे फौरन याद आ जाएगा. Let me go to my book. This is the suprameatal triangle. This is suprameatal triangle. इसकी आपसी बाउंड्रीज पूछ ली जाती हैं. or boundaries are asked in the exams, and the examiner, yes, thank you so much, and examiner do ask you to label these in the skull in front of him or her during your examinations. So this is all about the lateral aspect. What more about lateral aspect? So these are almost all the things that are about the lateral aspect. Let me see if I've covered these things. So we have discussed the frontal bone, we have discussed the bones, frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital is also seen here. I did not mention here. Greater wing of sphenoid. We saw the sutures. The major ones were sagittal, not very seen here. It is present somewhere here. Coronal suture, squamous suture, lambdoid suture. Styloid is the most important part. It is the thinnest part of the bone. The anterior division of the middle laryngeal artery passes behind it. The breakage leads to epidural hematoria, and it leads to the compression of the precentral sulcus, precentral gyrus, so premotor and primary postcentral area also, because this is lying at the sylvian point where the central sulcus meets the lateral sulcus. So we talked about the temporal fossa. Anterior margin is being made by the frontal bone and the zygomatic bone. Superior margin is made by the superior temporal lines. Posterior margin is being made by the temporal lines. Inferior margin, I did not discuss with you. Inferior margin, it's a little tricky. Inferior margin, it is made lateral inferior margin is made by this zygomatic bone here, zygomatic arch here, containing of those both bones. And if we remove the zygomatic arch, you will see this dotted line, infratemporal crest. Let me show you again on here. You will see the zygomatic arch here, and if you are able to appreciate, the bone takes a very sharp bend right here. At this point, the bone takes very sharp bend. Above it, it is almost vertical, and below it is almost horizontal. So this point, this line, it's called what? It is line, it's called infratemporal crest. uh, Let me get back to here. So you will see this aspect, this vertical aspect, and this horizontal aspect. This is infratemporal crest. So this is the margins of the temporal fossa. And if you can see from here, I just said that the lateral aspect it's made by this zygomatic arch, and the medial aspect is by infratemporal crest. This means that we are, this is the medial aspect of the inferior margin, this is the lateral aspect. So we are left with this communication. So this is the communication through which the temporal fossa communicates with infratemporal fossa. So this is the opening between the zygomatic arch and the bone behind that we will discuss again. So this is about the lateral surface. So I'll give again a few minute or two for any questions you have to ask. Just before finishing, let me get to here. Let me get to this. We discussed about the lateral margin. This infratemporal fossa. Infratemporal fossa, I'm talking about the fossa. We'll be talking only about the bony aspects. I'm not talking about the openings in much detail or the communication or the muscles that are present in it. So which structures are forming? So this dotted lines, that lines the infratemporal fossa. This fossa area is visible very only when there is a presence, there is a removal of the mandible, and there is a removal of the zygomatic arch. So from this picture you can see which structures are forming the anterior aspect. Anteriorly, it is made by the posterior aspect of zygomatic bone and posterior aspect of maxillary bone. What I mean by the posterior aspect, it will be a little more clear when we go to the 3D model. Superiorly, it shares the same boundary as the temporal fossa. That is the medial aspect, there is an infratemporal crest, and laterally there will be zygomatic arch. Posteriorly, the defining point is this styloid process. It is not a very good circumscribed, or there is closed cavity. but this styloid process as the back. And on the medial aspect, you can see from front to back which structures are present. There is this bone. Which bone is this? Maxillary bone. There is this yellow bone, that is the part of sphenoid bone, that is the lateral plate of the sphenoid bone. And just at the base of it, a part of the palatine bone, it's seen here. Pyramidal process is seen right here. It was labeled, no, it is not labeled here. It is this pyramidal process. And there is a muscle. I won't be naming the muscles right now, covering here. And at the back there will be the styloid process. So these are the bones that are making the medial aspect. This part, this space, there are two words that are used: pterygomaxillary fissure and pterygopalatine fossa. They create a lot of confusion. um, let me try my best to answer these. Let's get here and let's do some. Okay, I'm a little new to these tools, so let me. Okay, so I have cut the temporal bone. Let me. Okay, so I have cut the temporal bone to show here. So here you can see the a little of the squamous part is also cut during this. So let's see. So here is the infratemporal fossa. Here, if you look from the back, you can see the anterior wall. Anterior wall is being made by the posterior aspect of maxillary bone. It is made by the posterior aspect of zygomatic bone. This is the anterior aspect. Posterior aspect, it is made by this styloid process. Medial aspect, it is made above the maxillary bone, the lateral pterygoid plate of the sphenoid bone. This little part, this one, this is the pyramidal process of the palatine bone. So these are making the medial aspect. And what will be on the lateral aspect? Can you guess? I'm not telling you, you will guess that and mention in the comments. So the middle on the you will tell me what is the lateral aspect. On the superior aspect, there will be this infratemporal crest. Don't worry, this edge is by mistake right now. And on the lateral aspect, there will be a zygomatic arch. So we were talking about this fossa. So this whole 3D depth structure that is present between the zygomatic bone and palatine bone and sphenoid bone here, this whole area, this whole fossa, the fossa, it's called pterygopalatine fossa. It is like the 3D space between the two, and the opening between them, like if there is let me try like this. So if this only this face, the front 2D space that is opening between the posterior margin of the maxilla and the anterior margin of the palatine bone, this is known as pterygomaxillary fissure. The whole of the cavity inside, that is basically the 3D space inside, that is present, in which there are the contents and the vessels and everything inside, that is called the pterygopalatine fossa. So for your understanding, for it is nearly synonymous. When we are talking about the pterygopalatine fossa or pterygomaxillary fissure, we are roughly talking about the same thing, but there is a technical difference that the actual space inside is called the pterygopalatine fossa, and the opening, the curtain in front of it, the point of entry into the fossa, that is the 2D plane, that is called the pterygomaxillary fissure. I think I must have boiled you enough. So I'm giving you a minute or 2 minute break. I'm right here, not going anywhere. So meanwhile, if you have any questions regarding the lateral aspect of the skull, you may post in the comments. I will like to answer it before moving into the a very difficult part, that is the